We are joined here by a special guest, Geoffrey Cubbage. He's been interviewed by Harlan's Media before, and it's good to see you again, but this is the first time here you're on our show. So, since this is the first time being on our show, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers about the reasons why you are building and supporting the Green Party here in Illinois?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. My name is Geoffrey Cubbage. I am the secretary of the Illinois Green Party currently, and I'm also one of our candidates for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, one of 5 candidates in that race. I came on board with the Green Party in Illinois in 2016, summer of 2016, and I came on board as someone who had, prior to that, been doing most of his work for a consulting company out in Afghanistan, a group that did development projects, agricultural projects, things like that. And I've been an oversight reporter and a top-level report writer and all of that as a contractor with them. And that was a real education in what a country looks like after America has bombed it into the ground and then turned around and sort of turned on the money spigot, turned on our foreign aid policy and the mess that creates. And that had me searching around for some way to get involved at the home front that was opposed to that kind of policy. And I realized very quickly, well, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans oppose our military or our foreign aid as we're doing it right now. So that drove me to the Greens pretty quickly.
So let's actually talk about third parties for a second, because it's clear that our current system is dominated by both Democratic and Republican leaders who control the system at the state and federal level, and it's very difficult for third parties to have a spot on the debate stage, get ballot get ballot access or get coverage from any media at all. And so in Illinois in particular, the Illinois Green Party and the Illinois Libertarian Party, they need to get 25,000 signatures plus an additional 25,000 signatures just to have a secure spot on the ballot and to be on a potential debate stage. So why is there so much resistance towards having third parties on the ballot and debating the other two candidates?
Sure. It comes from a lot of different directions. Part of it obviously comes from the people who are in power, right? Every state writes its own election laws, which means that it is the Illinois legislature that writes and modifies our election code. Anyone who's in that legislature got there playing by the existing rules, got there in the existing system, so they have zero motivation to change it. It worked for them, and it clearly didn't work for their opponents, so why would they change it? So there's that inertia right there. Then on the media side, it is a lot easier to report on races when they're a two-party horse race, when it's just there's Team A and Team B, and everyone thinks one team is good and one team's evil. It makes the story a lot simpler. You can turn it into a soundbite. It's very convenient. The media doesn't really like parties that make you break out of that binary, get out of the left versus right, red versus blue, Marx versus Smith, however you want to break it down. As soon as you get more than 2 binary polls, it gets much more complicated to report on, and editors don't necessarily like that.
All right. Paul?
I wanted to ask a little bit about, you had a Facebook post just a few days ago about voting in your district, but you said you didn't vote for yourself. I wondered if you could regale that story for us.
Yeah, so this is a tale of election law in Cook County and how weird that can get. And anyone who's ever tried to file for office in Cook County knows how Byzantine the process can be. But so the real short version of it is this: the City of Chicago Board of Election Commissioners is a separate election authority from the Cook County Clerk's Office. Now, the race I'm running in, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, is a Cook County race. It is administrated by the Cook County Clerk's Office. Candidates who file for that office file with the Cook County Clerk's Office. A vacancy was created for a 5th seat on that district right at the end of the filing period. A man named Timothy Bradford died, one of the seated commissioners. That created a vacancy of Bradford is what they're calling it, but it was too late for candidates to file using the regular process. So what the Cook County Clerk's Office did, rather than allow Bruce Rauner to appoint a replacement, was they said, we'll put this on the ballots in November. This will be a November general election seat. But to get on the ballot in November, you have to run as a write-in candidate on your party's primary ballot in March. So that's what I'm doing. I am the Green Party's registered write-in candidate for the vacancy of Bradford election. Now, Illinois state law says when a candidate files as a write-in candidate with the election authority to whom petitions for that office are submitted, a primary shall be held. So that's what we did. We submitted a write-in statement of candidacy with the Cook County Clerk's Office. And they said, great, we'll print ballots, your name will be on it. The City of Chicago Board of Election Commissioners has claimed that because we did not file as a write-in candidate with them as well, even though they are entirely within the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, they are not obligated to print ballots. Now, I don't think that legal theory will hold up, but it's 3 days till election at this point. The odds that it's going to be decided in court before then are pretty much non-existent.
Pretty much,
So
yeah, zero.
it may set a useful precedent for if this one weird situation ever happens again. But in terms of practical effect, it means we have to get all of our votes from the suburbs. And write-in elections do have a minimum number of votes. You have to get as many write-in votes as you would have submitted petition signatures. So to get onto the November ballot, I need 1,720 suburban Cook County voters to pull the Green Party ballot and write my name in. It's a huge hurdle.
Oh, wow, that's a huge.
Well, I do have to say,
climb.
we've interviewed a few people that have done write-in. Your name is more easy to spell than them, so you have at least that going for you.
Geoffrey with a G for all our listeners out there.
All right. So I think it's very important for a lot of our viewers to understand different seats that are being that are up for election. Recently, we interviewed candidates that are running for the SCC, State Central Committee for the Democratic Party. And for a long time, a lot of people just didn't know what the SCC was. So in this case, for your election, you and 4 other members of the Illinois Green Party are running for the Water Reclamation Board of Greater Chicago. So for our viewers, what is the significance of these seats, and what role does it play in our daily affairs?
Yeah, so the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, MWRD for short, is a taxpayer-funded agency that is responsible for 3 things in Cook County. They are responsible for flood abatement and flood management. They are responsible for sewer and wastewater treatment, and they are responsible for testing the water quality of our waterways, of the actual water in the streams and rivers. And it is managed by a 9-member board of commissioners, and we elect those commissioners. We elect them in partisan elections. For the past several decades, every commissioner elected to that board has been a Democrat, so it's been one-party rule for the better part of my lifetime. And often that's been because, there was no one else on the ballot. These have often been uncontested races in the past. But this year there are 5 seats that are going to be on the November ballot, and we have 5 Green Party candidates for it. The Republican Party, I think, filed like 2 candidates, and they don't have one for the vacancy of Bradford, so they will not have a full slate. But the Green Party is the only opposition party out there that has a full slate for this. And I'd be happy to talk about some of the problems we've seen on the board, some of the issues that we think need to be addressed there. Go for it.
Please do.
You go for it, yeah.
Yeah, dive right in. So I'll try to keep it brief here, but what we've seen on the
Go
board...
in detail, please.
What we've seen on the board during these years of one-party rule is an increasing slowness to change and an increasing amount of what looks to be insider dealing, pay-to-play sort of politics. The MWRD is a huge taxpayer expense. Their budget is over $1 billion a year, billion with a B. And that is a tax line on your property tax bill. There's a sewage sewer bill, MWRD bill. And where a lot of that money goes is to private contractors. They hire private firms to do everything from infrastructure projects to document shredding to like managing the parking lots. There's all kinds of private contracting flowing out of that. And we did an analysis. We sat down and took a look at where that spending had been going. 5 years of it is available online. So we looked at all the contracts issued in the past 5 years and found that about 60% of the contracting budget went to campaign donors of the MWRD candidates who currently sit on that board. So private firms would donate money to the re-election of these Democratic board members. They would then bid for contracts with the board, and those members would be voting on whether or not to approve the contract. And unsurprisingly, they approved all of them. They never rejected a contract bid that came up in front of them. So that's something, the idea that there's no oversight, there's no other party that's willing to push back on that right now and hasn't been for 20 years is worrying to us. The Green Party is not an austerity party. We're not like, let's starve government to death, but we want the spending to be responsible. We want it to be going to things that help the citizens of Illinois and of Cook County and of all of Illinois, because what happens in our waterways here goes downstream, right? Yeah. So this is a Cook County election, but it affects the entire state when you're talking about water quality.
And we need fresh, clean water to function
and
to live.
Yeah, and that mission, the clean water, is we have huge concerns about that. The Tribune did an examination last year and found that on average we are dumping raw sewage into our waterways, untreated sewage, every 6 days in Cook County. There is a raw sewage outflow somewhere, and that's because the infrastructure we have just isn't capable of handling rain when it hits Cook County.
I want to ask a quick follow-up question to that because that's one of my questions right here. What kind of political action can the Water Reclamation Board of Greater Chicago do to bring justice and to call for new infrastructure to be built?
Yeah, so some things they would need buy-in from other government agencies, right? As soon as they get off their own land, they're going to need City of Chicago buy-in, Cook County buy-in, state buy-in. There are all sorts of different levels of government in play here. But one of the things the MWRD can do unilaterally is use the land that it already owns. The MWRD is a huge landowner. They have nearly 10,000 acres of property in Cook County. They're supposed to use that for flood prevention or water treatment purposes, but they play landlord. They rent it out to private industry, including waterway polluters. The EPA has actually sued tenants on MWRD land because they polluted the waterway with chemicals that aren't supposed to be there. There's oil tanks, there's an antifreeze manufacturer, all rented out on taxpayer land owned by the agency responsible for water purification. But what they could do with that land instead, what the Green Party would like to see them do, is devote it to rain-absorbing green infrastructure. Right? We have a system of tunnels and reservoirs, but we know it doesn't work enough. Cook County is almost completely paved. So as soon as rain hits the pavement, the only place it has to go right now is into the tunnels, into the reservoirs. Those back up very quickly, and it's a combined sewer system. So when the rainwater comes back out, it's bringing all the sewage with it. So what the Green Party would like to see us doing on those 10,000 acres of land is creating wetlands restoration, planting deep-rooted trees, doing things that will absorb the water before it goes into our gray infrastructure that we know is inadequate.
Okay.
I want to just jump back to at the beginning we're talking about. Can you explain to people that don't already know what you're running as Green? We've had Libertarians, they've been saying the same thing. What are all the large disadvantages that you have to do? Because it's not just that you're running for a Green, people don't know about Greens that much, there isn't money. What is the extent of how much harder it is for you as a Green to get on and win a primary challenge of any type versus a Democrat or Republican?
Sure. So when you're talking statewide, state election law, the situation breaks down into two categories. You're either a new party or an established party, and the threshold for becoming established is very high. It's 5% of the vote, and to do it statewide, it has to be 5% of the vote in a gubernatorial election year. So even if Jill Stein, for example, the presidential candidate in 2016, had gotten 5% of the vote in Illinois, that still wouldn't have counted. We still would not have been considered a real party by Illinois standards. So you got to get 5%, and until then, you're a new party. And the difference in ballot access in terms of getting your name onto a general election ballot is this. In Illinois, every candidate for office has to submit a petition. That petition has to be signed by a certain number of voters within their district saying, yeah, I want this candidate to be on the ballot. If you're an established party candidate, that number in most races, there are a few races that have a fixed number, but if you're in most races, if you're an established party candidate, that number is equal to 1/2% of the votes that your party got in the last election. Now, if you're a new party candidate, the number you submit is equal to 5% of the total votes cast in the last election. So that breaks down in different ways in different districts, depending on the partisan vote share. But on average, we looked at the congressional races as a good benchmark, and on average, it's 23 times harder for a third-party candidate or an independent to get their name on the ballot as it is for the Democrat or the Republican. And additionally, the timeframes are different. The filing period for established parties is roughly a year before Election Day. So Democrats and Republicans filed in October, November. The end of the filing period was December.
Can you really quickly just explain why that year means so much?
Yeah. So it's the difference of knowing that you are actually the candidate of your party with your party's backing a year before Election Day versus 4 months before Election Day, and having that year to be doing campaigning, to be talking to voters. Whereas if you're a third-party candidate, you can start before and hope you'll get the nomination, hope you'll become an official candidate, but you're not an official candidate yet, and you're going to have to stop in the middle. You're going to have to stop in the summer before Election Day and take 3 months to do that petitioning process, to gather the number of signatures that's already much higher at a time when everyone else is running ads, they're doing candidate events,
So just to kind of to summarize, they get about a year, a lot more extra time to build up a base, to get this process done of getting enough signatures to get people to know about them, to raise money. And the Green Party has to do, like you said, several times more signatures in less than half the time. And then I remember last time we spoke half a year ago or whenever it was that then when you want to try and raise money for people, they go, oh, are you on the ballot? And you have to be like, well, I mean, we're going to be on the ballot, we think. And everyone else is already raising money. So you're a small party with no money that has to fight with half the time while everyone else has already built their infrastructure. You have to start building your infrastructure.
That's exactly right. And it also comes down to what are your volunteers doing, during that peak summer season. Are you out knocking doors talking about the issues? Are you doing canvassing? Are you doing events? Or are you just standing on train platforms and street corners trying to get these thousands and thousands and thousands of signatures, which ultimately don't really indicate any kind of support. Most people, when you shove a clipboard in their face, they either walk away or they sign, and they don't really care much what's on it. We've got there's that Nazi that got on the ballot, right? And that was because he got on as a Republican in a deeply Democratic district, so he only needed like 600 signatures or something like that. Does anyone really believe that means there are 600 devout Nazis in that district? No, it just means that people were willing to sign the clipboard that got pushed in front of them. So it's a meaningless benchmark in the first place. And there are alternatives. There are a lot of states that don't do signatures. Instead, they have a moderate filing fee. Often it'll be like 0.5% of the salary that the office receives, something like that. A progressive solution that I've seen floated that I would love to see in Illinois is have a filing fee that's something like 0.5% of the candidate's annual income. And can you imagine if we'd had that in place for Pritzker, Rauner, JB? That could fill a lot of holes in the Illinois state coffers, right? So there are alternatives. But again, it's state law. The state legislature would have to make that change.
We're seeing nationwide, at least according to last amount of polling data, that 40% of Americans are identifying themselves as independents. They've lost confidence in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But when it finally comes down to actually seeing a third party member on the debate stage, again, they're kind of cast aside. So I think looking at the 2016 election cycle, do you think Americans are starting to reevaluate third parties as a political force? And if that's the case, what are the realities that a lot of Americans who want to vote independent, what are they going to have to deal with, especially if they want to have somebody fight for their issues that's not Democrat or Republican?
Sure. I think, like everything in politics, it comes down to who's able to get their message out, who has access to mass communications, right? Most people, and I've been knocking a lot of doors for this race, most people, when you get on their doorstep and you say, hey, let's talk about the issues, especially when it's a bread and butter issue like water quality, like, hey, is your basement flooding? Hey, does the stream near your house stink? Like, people are real happy to talk to anyone about that, and partisan ideology doesn't come into it that much. But there's only so many face-to-face conversations any one candidate can have. So, there are, I think, like you say, probably a majority of Americans who are sympathetic to third-party or nonpartisan ideology, but when it comes to making the choice in the ballot booth, all the messaging they get and all the media coverage they get is about the binary. It's about two parties. It's about red versus blue. And we're slowly starting to see that change, and I think the rise in new media is helping, enormously with that. So especially a lot of younger folks are getting their information from things that aren't the television, things that are willing to reach out and talk to third parties and have those more complicated conversations. So we're seeing the change, but we've got a long way to go before it reaches every American household, and that honestly just comes down to money and media.
Right. And speaking of media, has there been – I know the Green Party has a few candidates, not only running for the municipal level, but you guys also have another person who's running at the congressional level. Why has there been such a lack of attention from the media towards third parties? I mean, we mentioned it before, but it almost seems that it's on purpose that they are ignoring this growing number that's starting to at least enter the political field.
Yeah, no, I tell people that there is no surer way to make sure my press releases go into the trash bin than to put Green Party at the head of it. It just seems like absolute death on everything we send out. But I will say during the primary cycle, part of that is that the Green Party does not have contested primaries in most of our districts right now, that there is one candidate for one seat in most cases. So there's less interest there. It's not when it's not a contested primary. And I'm hopeful that we will see more media coverage once we're on the ballot and we're into the general election. Now, that said, I think there is a sort of assumption on the part of a lot of media folks that Green Party candidates are unserious candidates, so it's not worth our time and effort to cover that. And I don't think that's a fair assessment, but I think the Green Party needs to be willing to do a lot of work to show that, we are serious candidates, and that's what we've been trying to do with this MWRD campaign, that we have an organized ground game, we have a volunteer team, we've got all the website, Facebook, all of that stuff set up. We've been doing fundraising not just locally but nationally, and we can show that. We have donors from all across the country who are coming in on this, and that takes away some of the talking points about, oh, well, you guys, you're not viable candidates. We're ready to say, no, we've got donors from, 15 different states. We've raised more, thousands of dollars. As a party that takes no corporate donations, we only accept individual donations. So it's much, much harder for us to raise that money because, the cap on individual donations is much lower than the cap on corporate donations. And obviously it's just a smaller pool to draw from.
Now, you mentioned earlier in this interview that Cook County is dumping raw sewage every 6 days into our lake, but also recently there's...
Not into the lake. Let me correct you on that.
Sorry.
It's into our waterways.
Into our waterways? Okay, thank you very much for that correction. But our lake is still at risk due to the fact that we have these unregulated industries in Indiana, for example, that are pouring toxic material into our lake. And so, at least for your office... what kind of political action can you do to at least hold other states accountable for the toxins that they're putting into a lake that Chicago uses?
Yeah.
I mean, we're using this lake, and right next door to us, toxic waste is being dumped right into.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's there's the industry in Indiana. Across from us, Michigan is one of the only states. I think it's the only state or province on the Great Lakes that does not have statewide sewage discharge standards. It's municipal standards. So some of the municipalities on the lake do a great job, and some of them don't. So there are all kinds of problems all the way around the Great Lakes, and there is a mechanism for handling those disputes. It's called the Great Lakes Compact, and we are a member of it. We're often the bad child in it. We are in disputes about Asian carp prevention in the Chicago Ship and Sanitary Canal, things like that. The MWRD only has jurisdiction over its own waterways, but those commissioners, those representatives, are certainly welcome voices in these sorts of discussions when they happen between all the different water authorities that border on those lakes. And it's not just the states, it's the provinces from Canada as well. It is an international agreement. So I would love to see the MWRD be a strong voice within the Great Lakes Compact, and also take some of the requests from our neighboring states a little more seriously, so that we've got a little more political capital to spend in that international fellowship of provinces and states.
Right. Has the MWR actually done anything in regards to stepping up and really addressing the pollution that's affecting our lake, be it from Indiana or anywhere else, or at least trying to bring in elected officials that can use their office to institute some kind of change?
Sorry, what body were you asking about?
Sorry, I meant the Water Reclamation Board.
The
yes,
MWRD.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that question. I can't speak for what the individual commissioners are currently doing to get more involved with that. It has most recently come up in the context of the request for more action from Illinois on invasive prevention in the Chicago Ship and Sanitary Canal, which we are historically foot draggers on. We're resistant to anything that would impede the flow of shipping traffic up and down those locks.
All right, so it's quite clear that there's a whole system being put into place that really needs to hold at least the cleanliness of our water, especially like Michigan, to be safe for all the people to use. So one thing I want to bring up, though, and you mentioned how there's these private companies that are on this 25,000 acre.
About 9,500 total.
Oh, 95. Okay, that's and they're using it. What are the names of these companies?
You can actually find them all on the website if you're interested. The MWRD, they have a section for real estate agents, but it includes an interactive map that shows you all of them. There's a number of tenants. I mean, it's quite a lengthy list. The parcels of land, there's at least several hundred of them. I don't recall the names off the top of my head, but there are multiple oil storage locations is one that I know of. And as I said, an antifreeze manufacturer, there's an asphalt manufacturer. A lot of it just gets used as docking space, for recycling or trash haulers that use barges, things like that. So it's quite a varied amount of usage. It does sort of turn into something else our campaign has been talking about, does turn into an environmental justice issue a lot of the time as well, because how this land gets parceled out and how it gets used changes dramatically depending on where in Cook County you are. If you're up along the North Shore Canal, that land is being given to municipal governments for sculpture parks, for golf courses, things like that. If you're down on the southeast side, it's being given over to industrial tenants, it's being given over to garbage dumps, it's being given over to chemical storage. And those obviously have an impact on the neighborhoods around them. If your home backs up on a golf course, that's very different from if your home backs up on oil tanks. So it's very easy to see how the land use gets parceled out and how that breaks down along racial lines and along income lines throughout Cook County.
Wow, that's definitely crazy. I never had no idea that this office had to deal with a lot of those kind of issues. So I think for a lot of our viewers who are at least curious about the other contenders in this race, what are the name of the other four people who are running for the in the Illinois Green Party as well?
Yeah, so the Green Party candidates are going to be Karen Rutan, who's a Southeast Side resident. She's in the Bush. Tammy Vinson, who lives out in Austin. She's a West Side resident. Chris Anthony from Pilsen. And then Rachel Wales, who lives out in the southwest suburbs. She's Oak Park. So those are the four candidates who filed during the normal filing period. 3 of them are running for 6-year terms, and Rachel Wales is running for the uncompleted 2-year term of someone who left, a candidate or a commissioner who left to sit on the Pollution Control Board. And those are all normal elections. They filed as normal candidates. They'll be on the November ballot. It's just that 5th seat, the vacancy of Bradford, where I am where it's Geoffrey Cubbage as the write-in candidate for the Illinois Green Party.
Well, they listed as that on the ballot, the vacancy of Bradford?
Yes, that is the so it'll be there are 3 different ballot lines for MWRD. The first one is going to be the 6-year terms, and there will be 3 of those. Then there will be the 2-year term. There will be the 2-year term that Rachel Wales is a ballot listed candidate for, and below all of those there will be MWRD commissioner, 2-year uncompleted term, vacancy of Bradford, and there will only be the option for a write-in. There won't be any candidates.
Now, it's quite clear that, if you're voting right now, Democratic voters vote for Democratic primary, Republicans vote for the respective Republican primary challengers. If people want to vote green, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so people who want to cast their vote for Greens, including in that write-in election, are going to need to do it on the Green Party ballot. So they go to their polling place or do an early voting location. They can go to early voting from now through Monday, or on Tuesday they can go to their polling place and they say, I want the Green Party ballot. And then it'll either be a touchscreen or a paper ballot. You fill in the ovals, check off the boxes, and then on that vacancy of Bradford, you select the write-in option and write in my name.
Are people allowed to vote for both Democrats and Green?
No, they're not. Illinois is a semi-open primary is what it's called, so you select one and you get to vote in it. So what we've been doing a lot of is knocking on the doors and talking to the homes of folks, specifically along the waterways and on the floodplains. Was our geographic targeting because we want to talk to people who are affected most. But we've been talking to folks who aren't regular primary voters or who aren't fixed partisan voters, folks who switch parties.
So what you're saying ostensibly is that the way the system's set up, if someone wanted to vote for the governor candidate, they would not be able to vote for you.
That's correct. That's how it's all set up. Yep. So our hope is that we're going to turn a lot of people who weren't primary voters at all into habitual primary voters just by convincing them to turn out and pull the green ballot. Now we'll see how that all works out in the years to come. But
And so, the real important though, I think I just want to ask this personal question. Significantly, what would it mean for you to actually win this seat and to actually help implement reform?
I think it would be incredibly significant for me and for everyone who cares about politics in Cook County, because the MWRD, with its contracting, with the semblance of pay to play, with all the concerns we have about this one-party rule, the ability to show that Cook County voters are done with that one-party rule, that they're willing to take one-party control away from the Cook County Democrat machine, would be so huge, not just for me, but for progressives in the Democratic Party as well. It would be an opportunity to say, look, voters are so tired of how this county is run that they put a green on your MWRD board. You need to shape up. And I think that would be huge for Cook County and for the city of Chicago. And for me personally, it would be a chance to put so much of this infrastructure and analysis work that I'd been doing in my time as a contractor working on projects in Afghanistan to work here at home. Because let me tell you, Afghanistan is a really, really good example of how bad things get when basic services aren't being met, when people don't have clean soil, when they don't have clean water, when they don't have clean air. Things get very desperate very quickly, and you don't have to go to Afghanistan to see that. You can see that right here in Chicago.
It's happening nationwide. So Geoffrey Cubbage, thank you so much for joining Hardlands Media. Real quick, where can our viewers find you on social media so they can learn more about your campaign, volunteer for you, or perhaps tell their friends and neighbors about your office that you're running for?
Absolutely. The easiest portal to find us on is our website, and that is MWRD-ILGP. For the MWRD and the Illinois Green Party. So MWRD-ILGP.org. They can find us there, and then we also put most of our stuff out through the Illinois Green Party social media, so you can find that as Illinois Green Party on Facebook and IL Green Party on Twitter.
All right. Thank you so much for joining Hardlands Media.
Thanks so much for having me here.
And to all our viewing audience, thank you so much for listening to us. You're listening to us on Q4 Radio. You can learn more about Q4 Radio at www.que4radio.org. You can listen to us every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And if you like Hardlands Media and what we do, check out our website. It's www.hardlandsmedia.com. That way we also have a link to our Patreon page. And if you really like what we do, please donate to our Patreon page. It allows us to build more content and produce this show. And to all our viewers and subscribers, thank you again for joining us. Peace, and let's all do what we can to build a better future.
You're watching Hardlands Media.